Sometimes, the path to healing is not found on a map, but in the echo of a stranger's cry. A journey that begins where the old world ends. The town of Silver Creek lay shrouded in a quiet grief. Sheriff Thomas, a man respected by all, was gone, taken by a sudden and relentless fever. In the vacuum of his absence, his brother, Caleb Blackwood, moved with chilling speed. His eyes, cold as river stones, held a glint of ambition that unsettled the townsfolk. Before the earth on his brother's grave had even settled, Caleb stood on Cordelia's porch. She was Thomas's only daughter, now alone in the world. His proposal of marriage was not a comfort, but a cage. He wanted her inheritance, the land her father had secured, and the legitimacy her name would grant his new authority. Cordelia looked at him, her sorrow hardening into resolve, and refused. Her refusal was a spark in the dry tinder of Caleb's pride. He could not tolerate such defiance. With the sheriff's star now pinned to his own chest, he began to weave a cruel narrative. He spoke in hushed tones to the townsfolk in the general store and the saloon, painting a picture of a young woman unhinged by grief. His words were poison, dripping into the ears of a populace already fearful of his stern command. He spoke of her strange silences, her vacant stares, twisting her sorrow into a sign of madness. It was a masterful, wicked performance. Soon, the whispers turned to consensus. Cordelia was unwell, and, for her own safety, she would be sent to a distant asylum. Cordelia watched as the town turned away from her. The friends who had shared meals at her father's table now crossed the street to avoid her gaze. Her uncle's lies had isolated her completely, trapping her in a prison of public opinion. The day Caleb's grim-faced deputy, Barrett, arrived with a carriage, no one stepped forward to object. Barrett's expression was unreadable, his movements efficient as he loaded her small travel bag. "It is for the best," Caleb said, his voice a mask of false concern. "You will receive the care you need." Cordelia met his gaze, her own eyes burning with a silent accusation. She knew this was not about care, this was about erasure. As the carriage rattled away from Silver Creek, Cordelia stared out at the familiar landscape, each landmark a painful reminder of the life being stolen from her. The fear that had been a cold knot in her stomach began to bloom into a terrifying certainty. Her uncle was not merely sending her away, he was disposing of her. She thought of her father, of his unwavering sense of justice and his deep love for this land. How could his own brother be so devoid of honor? The rolling hills gave way to the vast open prairie, an endless expanse of sun-scorched earth. The carriage was a tiny speck in a vast, indifferent wilderness, carrying her toward a fate she could not yet comprehend. Hours passed. The sun climbed to its zenith, beating down upon the carriage with oppressive heat. The landscape became a monotonous blur of brown and gold. Finally, in a place where no landmarks broke the horizon, Barrett pulled the horses to a halt. The silence that descended was absolute, broken only by the buzz of insects and the sigh of the wind. He opened the door, his face a stony mask. "Get out," he commanded, his voice flat and devoid of emotion. Cordelia hesitated, her heart pounding against her ribs. "What is this place?" "The asylum is still a day's ride away." Barrett did not answer, his cold gaze urging her out onto the parched earth. He watched as she stepped out of the carriage, her fine town shoes sinking into the dust. He reached inside, took her small bag, and tossed it onto the ground beside her. Then, he unhooked the water canteen from the side of the carriage and emptied its contents onto the thirsty ground. The water vanished into the dust in an instant. "Caleb said to let the wilderness decide your fate," Barrett stated, his voice a low growl. He climbed back into his seat without another glance in her direction. The crack of his whip was like a final judgment, and the carriage rolled away, leaving her utterly alone in the immense, silent prairie, a prisoner of the endless sky. A wave of disbelief washed over Cordelia, followed by a surge of pure, cold terror. She screamed after the departing carriage, but her voice was swallowed by the vastness. She was a castaway on an ocean of grass. Panic gave way to a desperate will to survive. She picked a direction, the one where the sun would be at her back, and began to walk. The heat was a physical weight, pressing down on her, stealing the moisture from her body. Her throat grew raw, and her vision began to blur at the edges. The world shimmered and warped around her. Each step was an act of defiance against the fate her uncle had chosen for her. But the sun was a relentless enemy. Her strength faded with the daylight. As the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in brutal shades of orange and purple, Cordelia collapsed. Her body could go no further. Thirst was a fire in her throat, and exhaustion was a leaden weight in her limbs. She lay in the dust, the cool of the coming night a small mercy. She thought of her father, his kind face, and a single tear traced a path through the grime on her cheek. The stars emerged, cold and distant, witnesses to her despair. Her consciousness began to drift, the world fading into a dark, silent void. This, she thought, with a final, weary sigh, was the end. Onako, a hunter of the Paiute people, moved silently through the twilight. He was tracking the faint trail of a pronghorn, his senses attuned to the subtle language of the land. It was then that he saw her, a dark shape against the pale earth, so still he first thought her a trick of the fading light. He approached with caution, his hand resting on the knife at his belt. He saw the fine dress, now torn and dusty, and the pale skin. A settler. His first instinct was to turn away, to leave her to the fate that had brought her here. The affairs of the settlers were not his concern. They had brought his people nothing but sorrow and loss. He knelt beside her, his clinical gaze assessing her condition. She was alive, but barely. Her lips were cracked, and her breathing was shallow. As he prepared to give her a few precious drops of water from his own supply, his eyes caught the glint of metal in the dust nearby. He picked it up. It was a belt buckle, heavy and ornate, fashioned into the shape of a snarling wolf's head. A cold dread washed over him, extinguishing all thoughts of leaving. He had seen this symbol before. It was the mark of the men who called themselves Blackwood's Regulators. The men who had ridden into his family's camp months ago, their faces set in grim lines. The memory struck him with the force of a physical blow. The scent of smoke, the sounds of chaos, the sight of his younger sister Nita, falling. The men with the wolf buckles had claimed his people were cattle thieves, a lie to justify their brutal raid. They had taken everything from him that day. Now, here was their mark, lying in the dust next to a woman left for dead. He looked from the buckle in his hand to the unconscious woman at his feet. She was not one of them. That was clear. She was another victim, discarded by the same cruel hand that had shattered his own life. She was a casualty of the same war. His purpose shifted. This was no longer about a stranger's misfortune. This was about a shared enemy. Leaving her here would be a victory for the man with the wolf symbol. Gently, he lifted her into his arms. She was lighter than he expected, fragile as a bird. He carried her through the darkness, his steps sure and steady, his mind racing. He did not know who she was or how she had crossed paths with his enemies, but he knew one thing for certain. Her survival was now tied to his own quest for justice. He would not let the wilderness claim another soul for Caleb Blackwood. Onako took Cordelia to a hidden alcove behind a waterfall, a secret place known only to his people. The air was cool and moist, a stark contrast to the punishing heat of the prairie. He laid her on a bed of soft furs and began the slow process of nursing her back to health. He used a poultice of crushed yarrow leaves to soothe her sunburned skin and gave her sips of cool, clean water mixed with a nutrient-rich paste of ground pine nuts and berries. For days, she drifted in and out of consciousness, her mind lost in a feverish haze. Onako sat vigil, his patience as deep and steady as the river that fed the falls. When Cordelia finally awoke, her mind clear for the first time in days, she saw Onako sitting by a small fire, his silhouette framed against the cascading water. Fear was her first reaction, but it quickly subsided when she saw the gentleness in his eyes. Her voice was a dry whisper, "Who are you?" He told her his name and explained how he had found her. He did not press her for answers, allowing her to speak when she was ready. Hesitantly at first, then with a torrent of grief and anger she told him everything. She spoke of her father, her uncle's betrayal, and the cruel deception that had led her to the brink of death. Onako listened without interruption, his expression a mixture of empathy and grim understanding. When she finished, her story hanging in the cool air between them, he showed her the wolf's head buckle. Cordelia recoiled as if struck. "That is the mark of my uncle's men, his regulators." Onako then shared his own story of loss, his voice low and heavy with pain as he described the raid on his camp and the death of his sister. In that moment, the cultural divide between them vanished, replaced by a profound and sorrowful connection. They were two different people from two different worlds, bound together by the same thread of injustice. A fragile alliance was forged in that hidden sanctuary. Cordelia, who had lost her trust in her own people, found an unexpected ally in a man she had been taught to fear. Onako, who had isolated himself in his grief, found a new purpose in her quest for justice. "My uncle must be stopped," she said, her voice gaining strength. "He will not rest until he has all the land, including the land your people live on." Onako nodded, his gaze fixed on the fire. "He has a darkness in him. It must be brought into the light." Their individual quests for revenge and justice merged into a single dangerous path. As her strength returned, Cordelia's mind raced, searching for a way to fight back. Words and laws were useless against a man like Caleb. They needed proof, something undeniable. She remembered stories her father used to tell about an old prospector named Jebediah, a recluse who lived high in the granite hills. Her father had trusted Jebediah completely, calling him the keeper of secrets for this whole territory. She believed that if anyone knew of Caleb's corrupt dealings, it would be Jebediah. "He was my father's oldest friend," she explained to Onako. "He sees everything from his cabin in the hills. We must find him." The journey to Jebediah's cabin was arduous. Onako led them through treacherous terrain, his knowledge of the mountains keeping them safe and hidden from the patrols of regulators that surely would be searching for her. As they traveled, a quiet companionship grew between them. He taught her how to read the signs of the trail, and she, in turn, read to him from a small book of poems she had managed to keep, her voice soft in the vast wilderness. One evening, sitting by the fire, he noticed her shivering and draped his own blanket over her shoulders. The simple gesture was filled with a warmth that had nothing to do with the fire. They found Jebediah's cabin nestled in a high, secluded valley. The old prospector emerged with a firearm in his weathered hands, his eyes narrowed with suspicion. He was a grizzled man with a beard as wild as the surrounding landscape. He did not lower his weapon until Cordelia stepped into the light. Recognition dawned in his eyes, followed by sorrow. "Cordelia, your father, I heard what happened, and I hear what your uncle is saying about you." He listened intently as she told her story, his expression growing darker with every word. He had long suspected Caleb's greed, but the depth of his cruelty shocked even him. "Your father knew," Jebediah said, his voice a low rumble. "He knew Caleb was making a secret deal with the railroad. They want to build a spur line right through this valley." He explained that the deal required access to the region's only reliable water source, the hidden oasis, a sacred site located deep within Paiute territory. Thomas found the signed contracts. He confronted Caleb the day before he fell ill. Jebediah was certain the proof was locked away in the sheriff's office. "Your father had a safe, a secret compartment inside it. That is where he kept things hidden from men like his brother." The knowledge of the safe gave them a clear objective, but the path back to Silver Creek was fraught with peril. Caleb's regulators were now actively searching the wilderness, not for a lost woman, but for a fugitive who held the key to his ruin. Onako's skills were their only shield. He taught Cordelia how to mask their trail, to move with the rhythm of the land, to become a part of the shadows. She was a quick study, her determination fueled by the desire for justice. She learned that survival was not just about strength, but about listening, observing, and understanding the world around her. During their long journey, the walls between them continued to crumble. One night, as a cold rain fell, they took shelter in a shallow cave. Huddled together for warmth, the silence was broken only by the drumming of the rain. "Are you afraid?" he asked softly. "I am," she admitted, her voice barely a whisper. "But I am less afraid with you here." He looked at her, his dark eyes reflecting the flickering firelight. In that moment he saw not a settler, not a woman of a different race, but a spirit as fierce and resilient as his own. He felt a connection to her that transcended words, a bond forged in shared loss, and a growing, unspoken affection. Onako shared with her the stories of his people, tales of the spirits of the land, of the coyote and the eagle. He explained how they used the resin of the pinyon pine not just for sealing baskets, but as a balm for wounds, a practice passed down through generations. Cordelia, in turn, told him of the cities in the East, of art and music, of a world so different from his own. They were explorers, charting the unknown territory of each other's lives. Their conversations were a bridge between two worlds, and with every story shared, they drew closer, their feelings for each other deepening into a quiet, powerful love. As they neared the outskirts of Silver Creek, the danger became palpable. They could see the campfires of the regulators dotting the hillsides. Their journey of survival was about to become a mission of infiltration. Onako gave her a small, carved wooden bird. For luck, he said, the hawk sees all from above. May it grant you its sight. She clutched the small token in her hand, its smooth wood a comfort against her skin. They were no longer just allies. They were partners. Their hearts and hopes intertwined, ready to face the darkness of the town together. Inside Silver Creek, Deputy Elias was trapped in a web of his own conscience. He had admired Sheriff Thomas and was loyal to his memory, but Caleb Blackwood ruled with an iron fist. Elias had seen the cruelty in Caleb's eyes and heard the lies he spun about Cordelia. His doubts solidified when he witnessed a clandestine meeting between Caleb and two well-dressed men from the railroad company. They exchanged a heavy satchel, and the satisfied smirk on Caleb's face afterward told Elias that something was deeply wrong. He could not openly defy the new sheriff, but he could not stand by and do nothing. Elias began his own quiet investigation. He started spending his evenings at the saloon, not drinking but listening. He learned from the loose tongues of Caleb's own regulators that their search for Cordelia was not a rescue mission. Their orders were to ensure she was never found. He also spoke with the town doctor, a timid man who confessed under pressure that the rapid progression of Sheriff Thomas's illness had been highly unusual, almost as if it were aided by something other than nature. Each piece of information was a stone, building a wall of evidence against his new boss. His search for allies was difficult. The town was paralyzed by fear. Many suspected Caleb was corrupt, but no one dared to speak out. Elias found a potential ally in Martha, the owner of the general store. She was a stern, no-nonsense widow who had been a close friend of Cordelia's mother. Elias confided in her, sharing his suspicions. Martha, whose sharp eyes missed nothing, confirmed that Caleb had been buying large quantities of supplies, far more than needed for regular patrols, likely for the railroad survey crews he was secretly supporting. They agreed to work together, a small pocket of resistance in a town under siege. Elias knew he was walking a dangerous line. One wrong move, one misplaced word, and Caleb would crush him without a second thought. He began making copies of shipping manifests and documenting the patrols of the regulators, creating a secret ledger of Caleb's activities. He did not know that Cordelia was alive or that help was on its way. He was acting on faith alone, a solitary man of the law trying to honor the legacy of his fallen mentor. His quiet rebellion was a ticking clock, counting down to a confrontation he knew was inevitable. Onako and Cordelia watched the town from a ridge as dusk settled, planning their next move. The main street was heavily patrolled. A direct approach was impossible. Onako devised a diversion. Using his knowledge of animal behavior, he explained a daring plan. He would use a dry gourd filled with pebbles to mimic the sound of a rattlesnake near the town's livery stable. The resulting panic among the horses would draw the attention of every regulator in the vicinity. It was a risky maneuver, but it would give Cordelia the precious minutes she needed to reach her father's office undetected. As darkness enveloped the town, Onako crept toward the livery. The rattling sound he produced was uncannily realistic. It was followed by the terrified whinnying of horses and the shouts of men. As predicted, the patrols converged on the stable, their focus entirely on the manufactured chaos. This was Cordelia's chance. She slipped through the shadows, her heart pounding with a mixture of fear and adrenaline. The town she had grown up in now felt like enemy territory. She reached the sheriff's office, the familiar building, now a symbol of her family's stolen legacy, and quietly let herself in with a key she had always kept. The office was dark and silent, filled with the ghosts of her childhood. She moved quickly to her father's desk and located the heavy iron safe hidden behind a wooden panel. Her fingers, though trembling, remembered the combination. The heavy door swung open with a low groan. She felt inside, along the back wall, until her fingers found the small, almost invisible latch. A secret compartment clicked open. Inside was a leather-bound ledger and a thick envelope. She pulled them out, her hands shaking as she recognized her father's handwriting. This was it. The proof she needed. She opened the ledger. It was filled with meticulous notes detailing Caleb's secret negotiations with the railroad, including dates, names, and payment amounts. Then, she opened the envelope. Inside was not a letter, but a personal diary. The last few entries were written in a shaky, deteriorating script. Her father described a growing weakness, a strange metallic taste in his morning coffee, and his terrible suspicion that his own brother was slowly poisoning him. The final entry was a heart-wrenching plea for justice. The truth was more monstrous than she could have ever imagined. As Cordelia stared at the diary, the page blurring through her tears, a floorboard creaked behind her. She spun around. Caleb Blackwood stood in the doorway, a lantern in one hand, a revolver in the other. A cruel, triumphant smile played on his lips. "I knew you would come back for it," he said, his voice smooth as oil. "You always were your father's daughter." So sentimental. He had not been fooled by the diversion. He had been waiting, using her as bait to retrieve the very evidence he intended to destroy. The office, once a place of safety, had become a trap. Caleb advanced into the room, his revolver aimed steadily at her heart. "Give me the diary, Cordelia." But she clutched it to her chest, her fear eclipsed by a sudden blazing anger. She would not let her father's last words be silenced. Thinking fast, she backed away toward the front window that faced the street. "You poisoned him," she said, her voice ringing with accusation, loud enough to carry. "You murdered your own brother for land and money." Her words were not just for him, but for anyone outside who might be listening. She began to read from the diary, her voice clear and strong, projecting the damning words into the night. Her voice drew the attention of Deputy Elias and Martha, who were already on edge from the commotion at the livery. They rushed toward the sheriff's office, gathering a small group of brave townspeople as they went. Just as Caleb lunged for Cordelia, a shape crashed through the window in a shower of glass. It was Onako. He had sensed the trap and doubled back. He tackled Caleb, sending the revolver skittering across the floor. The fight was brief and brutal, but it gave Elias and the others the time they needed. They burst through the door to find Caleb pinned to the ground by the Paiute warrior. The scene that greeted the townspeople was damning. Cordelia stood, diary in hand, her face a mask of righteous fury. Onako held the disarmed and defeated sheriff. Elias, seeing the truth in an instant, stepped forward and placed Caleb under arrest. There was no resistance. Caleb looked at the faces of the people he had manipulated, at the evidence in Cordelia's hand, and at the Paiute man who had become his undoing. His reign of terror, built on a foundation of lies and fear, had crumbled in a matter of moments. The truth, once revealed, was more powerful than any weapon he possessed. The arrest of Caleb Blackwood sent a shockwave through Silver Creek. The contents of the diary and the ledger were made public, revealing the full extent of his treachery. The townspeople, shamed by their own complicity and fear, turned to Cordelia, asking her to take her father's place as their leader. She looked at their faces, saw their regret, but knew she could not stay. This town held too many ghosts, too many painful memories. "Justice is not about one person holding power," she told them. "It is about a community choosing to do what is right." She endorsed Elias as the new sheriff, knowing he would lead with integrity. Before leaving, Cordelia used the authority of her family's name and the resources from her inheritance to accomplish one final task. She arranged a formal meeting with the elders of Onako's people. With Elias at her side to represent the town's new leadership, she presented them with a treaty. It was not a treaty of surrender or concession, but one of mutual respect. It guaranteed the Paiute people undisputed rights to their ancestral lands and the sacred hidden oasis, ensuring that no railroad or corporation could ever threaten them again. It was the beginning of a fragile peace, built on the ashes of tragedy. Her work done, Cordelia prepared to leave Silver Creek for good. Onako waited for her at the edge of town, 2 horses ready for a new journey. As she approached, he took her hand. "Where will we go?" she asked, her gaze turning to the open horizon. "We will find a place where the land is good, and people are judged by their hearts, not by the color of their skin," he replied, his voice filled with a quiet certainty. He looked at her, his love for her shining in his eyes, a love that had been tested by fire and found to be true. She knew that with him, she was finally home. They rode away from Silver Creek, not looking back. Their path was uncertain, but they faced it together, 2 survivors from different worlds who had found in each other a shared future. Their story became a quiet legend in the territory, a tale whispered around campfires. It was a story of injustice and betrayal, but also one of courage, resilience, and a love that was strong enough to bridge divides and heal the deepest of wounds. They did not change the world, but they built their own, a testament to the idea that even in the harshest of lands, hope could find a way to grow.